You've probably heard. The sports world was rocked with the announcement that Luka Doncic was going to be traded to the Lakers. Luka is a consensus top 3 player in the league, is the face of the Mavericks, and has the potential to be an all-time great. And despite all that, he was traded and Dallas didn't shop him at all while the Lakers fleeced them. It's baffling and is maybe the biggest trade in the sport's history. But this got me thinking, what are some of the other wild transfers and trades in the history of sports? So I went looking and found the craziest from across the world of sports. We're talking basketball, European football, American football, baseball, hockey, and more. Be sure to stick around to the end to hear about some wild trades that I can guarantee are going to be new to you. With that, let's start simple. What are some of the other times that NBA franchises have fumbled the career of an all-time great player? Well, did you know that both Kobe Bryant and Dirk Nowitzki, Lakers and Mavericks franchise legends respectively, were not drafted by those teams where they played at for their entire careers? In Kobe's case, going into the draft, Lakers GM Jerry West knew that he was a huge fan of the high schooler, but they didn't have any picks. So he came up with a plan where he'd pull as many levers as possible in order to convince the Charlotte Hornets to draft Kobe. Then he shipped off big man Vlade Divac to Charlotte, who needed a center. And the plan worked perfectly. Kobe was drafted 13th overall by the Hornets, was immediately traded to the Lakers, and the rest is history. Similarly, in the 1998 draft, Dallas did not draft Dirk Nowitzki. Instead, with their 6th pick, they drafted Robert Tractor Traylor. They wanted to draft Dirk, but they had a plan. So they let Dirk fall until the Bucks drafted him, traded Robert Traylor to them in exchange for Dirk and the 19th pick. And then in another trade, they used that 19th pick to get eventual MVP point guard Steve Nash. This was a brilliant series of moves by the Mavs front office. I wonder what changed between then and the Luka trade. Anyway, now let's talk about the infamous Julius Erving trade in the 1970s. The great Dr. J revolutionized basketball, popularizing the now ubiquitous slam dunk and also leading the New York Nets to multiple ABA titles. Then in 1976, the Nets, along with 3 other teams, joined the National Basketball Association. But with this ABA-NBA merger also came some debts. The teams joining the NBA owed the league about $3 million apiece, and the Nets also owed an extra debt to the New York Knicks for territorial infringement. And alongside this, their star player Dr. J was up for a new contract. The Nets simply couldn't pay all of this, and they were forced to trade away Erving for cash. The Philadelphia 76ers came answering the call to the tune of $2.5 million. This trade move was not well received by Nets players or fans, with many of them suing the team to get a refund on their season tickets. And shortly after that, the New York Nets defaulted on their debt to the Knicks and moved from New York to New Jersey. So the great Dr. J was sold for cash to pay for a debt that didn't even get paid. Brutal. There's a ton of other wild basketball trades that we can talk about. The Bucks trading Kareem to the Lakers, the Rockets trading Moses Malone to the Sixers, the Celtics trading Bob McAdoo to the Pistons, and more. But let's not just talk about the NBA. They're not the only league with unexpected and wild trades in their history. In 1983, the Baltimore Colts drafted All-American quarterback John Elway. However, Elway refused to play for the Colts. They were one of the worst teams in the league, and they had an infamously harsh head coach. Elway threatened that he'd go play Major League Baseball before he would play for the Colts. Baltimore did draft him, but they immediately traded him away to the Denver Broncos. Throughout his career with Denver, John Elway was a 9-time Pro Bowler, won the MVP, led the team to 2 Super Bowls, and retired as a first-ballot Hall of Famer. If only the Colts coach wasn't such a jerk. Not every regrettable trade comes immediately after drafting a player, though. In the mid-2000s, the great wide receiver Randy Moss was languishing away in Oakland. After 7 stellar seasons with the Vikings, he joined the Raiders. But across his 2 seasons there, he only had 11 touchdown receptions and was widely viewed as a frustrating disappointment. In response, Raiders coach Lane Kiffin decided to ship him away. And who came calling was Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. What they gave in return for getting Randy Moss? The rights to pick 110th in the draft. Basically pennies. Immediately upon joining the Patriots and quarterback Tom Brady, Randy Moss had the best season of his career, breaking the league record for the most touchdowns caught in a single season and helping lead the team to a 16-0 record. That's gotta hurt for Oakland, seeing that success and knowing that you only got a 4th-round pick in return. Speaking of giving away picks, let's now talk about the largest trade in NFL history. In the 1980s, running back Herschel Walker was one of the best players in the league, but his team, the Dallas Cowboys, were decidedly not that good. In fact, they were probably the worst team in the league, winning only 1 game in 1989. By one account, the team was so dysfunctional that they had trouble even properly huddling up. But still, the Cowboys had Walker, and so shrewdly, the Dallas front office realized their opportunity. They let the league know that Herschel Walker was up for trade. The bidding war began and was won by a team that believed they were just one great running back away from success, the Minnesota Vikings. In a complex trade document that was described as maybe longer than the Magna Carta, the Cowboys gave the Vikings Herschel Walker in exchange for 4 players and 3 picks. Critically though, this trade also came with more potential draft picks, conditional that the Cowboys cut the players they traded for from their roster. Basically, the Vikings were gambling that the Cowboys needed those players more than they needed those conditional draft picks. Surely they wouldn't just tank their team completely, right? But the Dallas head coach Jimmy Johnson was in full scorched earth rebuild mode and was ready to go all in on the draft and the future of the team. So he did, cutting the players and pulling in the entire haul of possible draft picks from Minnesota. Then he turned these picks into players that would become the backbone of the Dallas Cowboys, including Emmitt Smith, the NFL's career rushing leader, Russell Maryland, and Darren Woodson, Dallas's all-time leading tackler. The Dallas Cowboys, with a team built basically completely off the backs of this trade, went on to win 3 Super Bowls in the early 90s as one of the great dynasties in the history of the NFL. Meanwhile, the Vikings have not made a Super Bowl since. This has gone down in the sports history books, known as the trade. Blockbuster moves like this are one of the most exciting parts of sports. Between rumors, heated discussion about how the trade is going to end up for the teams involved, and the resulting fascination of watching the players on the new teams, it's just a fun time to be a sports fan. So here's a lightning round of some of the biggest blockbuster trades and transfers in sports history. 2 different times, the Houston Astros have signed one of the biggest name pitchers in baseball at the last possible minute. Randy Big Unit Johnson signed to Houston minutes before the 1998 trade deadline closed and subsequently put up a 1.28 ERA and finished in the top 10 of Cy Young voting in the NL, despite only playing 11 games in that league. Then in 2017, the Astros traded for the great Justin Verlander just minutes before the August 31st deadline for a player to be eligible for the postseason roster. During his tenure with the team, Verlander would become a key part of Houston's roster, winning 2 Cy Youngs, multiple AL pennants, and finally, Verlander's first World Series ring in 2022. In 2009, Real Madrid embraced the Galacticos philosophy, espoused by their new president, Florentino Perez, where you spent big in order to achieve success on the field. In a single transfer window, they spent over 200 million euros on players like Xabi Alonso, Karim Benzema, and biggest of all, Kaká from AC Milan and Cristiano Ronaldo from Manchester United. Then in 2017, the world record for the largest transfer fee paid for a player was smashed when Paris Saint-Germain paid 222 million euros for Barcelona star winger Neymar. Barcelona had set the Brazilian's contract release clause at that astronomical number, thinking that no team would or even could pay that much. Barcelona didn't expect PSG, backed by a Gulf state, to come in and fork over hundreds of millions. But they did, and so Neymar moved to Paris. Another massive trade came recently in the world of racing sports, when Lewis Hamilton, one of the most decorated F1 drivers of all time, switched from the ice blue of Mercedes, the team that he won 6 World Driver Championships with, to the iconic red of the Ferrari team. The past 2 decades of the NBA have been rocked multiple times by blockbuster trade and free agency signings, and for some reason, they have often involved the Oklahoma City Thunder. Of course, there's LeBron James' free agency decision to take his talents to South Beach, but also Kevin Durant to the Warriors, James Harden to Houston, and Paul George being traded to the Los Angeles Clippers to join Kawhi Leonard, in exchange for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a ton of picks. And these picks have created the OKC juggernaut that we see today. Speaking of big player swaps, in 2009, Cameroonian striker Samuel Eto'o and Swedish striker Zlatan Ibrahimovic, both some of the best of their generation, were swapped for one another, with Eto'o going to Inter Milan and Ibra going to Barcelona. This swap deal may not sound super notable, at least on the face of it, but they're very uncommon in the football world. See, the vast majority of player moves in football are transfers, not trades like we're accustomed to in American sports. Simply, you buy and sell players with cash, not trade them for assets like other players or draft picks. It's also worth mentioning that there is no draft system in European football. However, there have been a few trades in football history. By far the biggest one was the Eto'o-Ibrahimovic swap. It worked out much better for Inter Milan, as backed out by Eto'o the year after the swap, they went on to win the treble, while Ibra was never really a perfect fit in Barcelona, and he ended up back in the Italian league a year later. Now, Samuel Eto'o is no stranger to wild transfers. In his career, he has played all around the world, at the aforementioned Titans, Barcelona and Inter Milan, but he's also spent stints in Russia, at Sampdoria, in the Turkish league, and then ending his career with Qatar SC. Not that these clubs are undeserving or anything, but they're certainly much smaller compared to the global scale and recognition of like Barca and Inter. And so it's rare that a striker of Samuel Eto'o's caliber would end up there. But Eto'o isn't the only footballer to end up playing for a club he was kind of out of place at. Recently, there has been an increasing trend of players moving overseas to play for smaller or less competitive clubs in exchange for a massive payday. Carlos Tevez of Man City fame and Oscar of Chelsea both went to play in the China League in 2017. Jesse Lingard left the Premier League for FC Seoul in South Korea, and recently a huge group of stars. Benzema, Neymar, Kante, Mane, Mahrez, and even Cristiano Ronaldo were allured to go play in the Saudi League. But for some, their time in the Middle East was very short-lived. The final entry in this section is Sol Campbell's shocking decision to leave the top division of English football and go to a team ranked far, far below, Notts County. As a two-time Premier League and FA Cup winner and a consistent member of top PL sides, most teams would have been happy to sign the defender, but instead, he chose to go to Notts County. The off-cited reason for this move was Campbell's wish to reunite with an old manager, but still, it remains a wild transfer. Sol Campbell could also reasonably be on this list for the infamous move he made earlier in his career, leaving the Premier League's Tottenham Hotspur to go to their bitter London rivals, Arsenal. Rivalries in European football are no joke. They're as deeply held as they come.
With Sol Campbell, you can't go from a local player and go to your biggest rival.
I can't even say his name without recoiling.
I remember when White Hart Lane had this last game, and they invited all like the legends there, and they didn't invite Sol Campbell, and he was really upset about it. But I thought, what do you expect?
Yeah.
It's not much of an exaggeration to say that fans see them as life or death. So this kind of transfer in football is known as the Judas transfer. Leaving a club to join a rival, that's unforgivable. The most prominent example of the Judas transfer is Luis Figo. The Portuguese winger rose to prominence playing at FC Barcelona. He spent 5 years with Barca, became a top player in the world, and became widely beloved by the team's adoring fans, even being named captain of the club. Then, in the summer of the year 2000, rumors began circling. Unbelievably, Real Madrid, Barcelona's rivals, had agreed to sign the 27-year-old. No one could believe it. But then, it became real, when Figo was unveiled in the Madrid white. Reactions from the Catalonian fans were not kind. One commenter describes, "We felt an explosion of anger and hatred because he was an idol in the city. There's no bigger betrayal. It's like if you are trusting your wife or husband and then all of a sudden you discover that he has another life." As a Madrid player, Figo won the Champions League, the Spanish League, and was even crowned as the best footballer in the world shortly after his signing. When Madrid traveled to play Barcelona in the famed El Clasico derby, the reception for Figo was ugly. Bodyguards were enlisted for safety, banners were hung around the stadium emblazoned with words like scum and traitor, and objects were thrown onto the field. In the most memorable moment, a severed pig head ended up on the field next to Figo as he prepared to take a corner. Luis Figo is undoubtedly one of football's great players, but perhaps what we remember him most for is this shocking transfer. Interestingly, Michael Laudrup, the incredible Danish midfielder, also made this same move, winning 4 league titles with Barcelona and then transferring to Real Madrid and winning another title with them. But he is still beloved by fans of both teams. Maybe he just has a really good PR team. But one person who does not have a good PR team is Maurice "Mo" Johnston. The striker grew up in Scotland and was a boyhood supporter of the football club Celtic. Now, Celtic has a deep-seated rivalry with the other major Scottish club, that being Rangers. The clubs were both founded in Glasgow, Scotland in the 19th century, and they have been by far the most successful and recognizable clubs in the country. But the rivalry between these clubs is bigger than sport. It's sectarian and rooted in politics and religion. Now, I won't get into all the details of the Catholic-Protestant divide in the British Isles, but for this video, just understand that the feud between Rangers and Celtic is as strong as they come. So, Mo Johnston is a lifelong supporter of Celtic and is lucky enough to then become one of the club's star players. In 1986, he helped Celtic to a league championship over, of course, Rangers. Then he spent a few years playing overseas, and in 1989, he returned to Glasgow. As you might guess, he didn't rejoin Celtic. Instead, shockingly, the club he transferred to was Rangers. When he first publicly appeared in the Rangers blue, fans of both clubs could not believe their eyes. He was the first player to cross the divide between these teams since World War II, and the first openly Roman Catholic player to join Rangers since World War I, in accordance with an open secret practice that Rangers would not allow any Catholic players to join their team. In response, Celtic fans burned their old Mo Johnston jerseys in anger of his treachery, while Rangers fans burned their team gear in response to this shocking signing. It's rare that both sets of fans are going to be so incensed at a transfer, but Mo Johnston accomplished that feat. The last one I'll mention in this section about players joining rival teams is probably the most famous transfer in American sports history, and that is Babe Ruth going from the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees. Even in the 1920s, Babe Ruth was the biggest name in baseball. All of America knew his name, and they knew that he was a Boston Red Sox. However, when it came time for him to sign a new contract for his team, he was looking for a pay raise that he felt would better reflect, and fairly so, his star power. But Boston couldn't afford that. Unfortunately for the Red Sox, and eventually, unfortunately for the entire league, the team that could afford Babe Ruth's new contract was the New York Yankees. Some theories posit that the team owner was looking for cash to help fund a musical that he wanted to produce, and so he saw that selling Babe Ruth to another team would be a quick way to get some cash, but that's not as reliable of a theory, and so I'll just quickly mention it here. Either way, the great Babe Ruth became a Yankee, much to the ire of Boston fans, as Babe Ruth and the Yankees went on to win 4 World Series rings, while Boston would have to wait almost a century for their next championship, a drought that's known as the Curse of the Bambino. Now, there's another trade in baseball history that is a part of this long-written story of the Curse of the Bambino. In 2004, on a February night, news broke that star shortstop Alex Rodriguez was going to New York. It had been a long winter of trade talks. The Texas Rangers could no longer afford A-Rod's expensive contract. Every team wanted him, but it seemed like he was destined to go to the Boston Red Sox. The deal got so close to being done with Boston that A-Rod even signed on the dotted line of a real contract. But critically, that specific deal involved restructuring A-Rod's contract in such a way that involved deferring some of the money. This was deemed unacceptable by the MLB Players Union, and so they stepped in with a veto. A-Rod responded, still voicing his interest at ending up with Boston, but a certain team had other ideas. The New York Yankees' Aaron Boone had just torn up his knee in the offseason, and so suddenly they were in need of a third baseman. But A-Rod was a shortstop. Could they convince him to play third base? Maybe. One dinner later, and news broke that A-Rod was willing to switch positions. Then the inevitable announcement fell. A-Rod was going to be a New York Yankee. Another star player, snatched from under Boston's noses and again by their bitter rivals. However, Boston got the last laugh. And that year's American League Championship Series, the Boston Red Sox made a comeback from being down 3 games to A-Rod and the Yankees to ultimately win that series 4-3, and then after it, the World Series, and perhaps the greatest comeback in sports history. And in doing so, they broke the curse of the Bambino. Perhaps losing A-Rod to New York was the sacrifice that the curse needed. The final part of this video is a section I'm going to call LA sports fans are so lucky. This Luka acquisition is just another in a long line of the Lakers somehow signing star player after star player. From Elgin Baylor and Jerry West to Wilt Chamberlain for some reason getting traded after getting 3 MVPs in a row in Philly, to Kareem and Magic Johnson, to Shaq and Kobe and Pau Gasol. Then LeBron joins the team out of nowhere, and now Luka. It's insane how this franchise keeps reinventing itself each time with a new superstar at the helm. But it's not just basketball. The Los Angeles Dodgers have been making baseball headlines for basically acquiring every star player you can think of. Somehow they got Mookie Betts from Boston. Then they got Freddie Freeman, and then somehow Shohei Ohtani in what was the biggest contract in sports history. And this offseason, it's gotten even more ridiculous as they've bolstered their pitching staff with Kirby Yates, Blake Snell, and notably another Japanese phenom in Roki Sasaki. But perhaps the most insane trade in Los Angeles sports history, and maybe all of sports history, came in the NHL. Even if you don't follow hockey at all, you know the name Wayne Gretzky. Known as the Great One, Wayne Gretzky is the statistical leader in most of the important categories in hockey. He scored almost 1,000 more points than the next closest player, won 9 MVPs, and his number 99 jersey is retired league-wide. He even has a main appearance in an epic rap battle of history, so talk about cultural importance. With this unequivocal greatness, it would be reasonable to expect that Gretzky's career was a one-team-only kind of career. Surely no team would let that kind of player go, right? Well, you would be right, except you have to remember that LA sports ignores all expectations of normalcy. So Wayne Gretzky was an Edmonton Oiler, playing in his home country of Canada. He had just led the Oilers to 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years, was the undisputed best player in the world, and was then traded to the Los Angeles Kings. What? But why? There are competing stories to explain this. If you ask the Edmonton front office, they claim that Gretzky was always planning on leaving and sunny LA became his destination of choice. If you ask the Great One, he wanted to stay and it was the Oilers who shipped him off. It wasn't clear why LA was getting Gretzky, but it was baffling. And either way, it was happening. Canadians countrywide were outraged by the news, and they petitioned their government to step in and stop the trade for their dear star. He wasn't just an athlete, he was a national symbol. But even the Canadian government was no match for the devil magic that LA sports possesses. And so, the greatest player to ever lace up his skates, packed his bags and headed to Southern California, like so many before and after him, including Luka Doncic. Even after how many times that I've read and heard that Luka is a Laker, it still feels strange to say. But that about covers it for the wildest trades and transfers in sports history. Thank you so much for watching the video. I truly hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, you can subscribe here on YouTube for more sports content like it. I'll see you in the next one.